Hello, everyone. So I'm Sarah Gansberger, the new president of the Memory Studies Association, and we are very welcome to welcome you all for this second event of the week around the issue of women and gendered violence. And again, I want to thank everyone at in the Seoul team with Sang-Yoon, who worked so much in organizing this week of event. And with no further delay, I give the floor to Carol Gluck, to whom I'm very grateful for organizing this second event and roundtable.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our panel on women and gendered violence. The impetus, the impulse for the panel was the change in memory of the comfort women. Those are the sex slaves of the Imperial Japanese Army across wartime Asia during the Second World War. I'm sure you've heard of them by now, but it is important for those of us in memory studies to realize that had we had this panel 30 years ago or more, you would not have heard of them. And it is an important example of a suppressed, not unknown, everybody knew about the comfort women, but not present in public memory. It's an example of a part of the past not present in public memory, which through a complicated but important process became well known, not only in Asia, not only in Japan, which was the perpetrator country, and not only in Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, China, the countries where the comfort women were recruited from, but known throughout the world. And that is an interesting process. So by the end of the 1990s, in 1990, you did not know about them. By the end of the 1990s, not only did you know about them, but many people knew about them. And the comfort women had become a traveling trope. It had traveled from the region of its origin in history to the realm of international law, the realm of movements against trafficking in women. It had become a trope for sexual violence against women, particularly in war, but not only. Much like the Holocaust over time became a trope for genocide. That's the background for us, I think. And it's a topic all in its own. But now we believe, in a different moment in terms of the memory of the comfort women, and that in at least two respects. One, the generalization or the movement of the comfort women memory across borders and across disciplines has given this topic a salience, an influence that needs to be assessed and in fact engaged with. In other words, this story is not over, and we need to think about what the memory of the comfort women will be going forward now that the surviving comfort women themselves have almost all passed away. So that's the first question, is what kind of work will the memory of the comfort women do in the world now and in the future? The second aspect of our present moment in this particular topic of memory has to do with dealing not only with let's call it an extreme case of sexual violence against women, but to see the comfort women in the context of sexual violence or violence against women, gendered violence in a continuum, this is Professor Ueno's word, in a continuum, not only from the extremities of war, but from daily life, everyday life, whether it's domestic violence, trafficking in young girls, or suppressed, repressed, silenced, general violence against women. In other words, we need to think about this in a broader way, broader in terms of place. So this is not only an Asian issue, broader in terms of sociology, politics, and culture. This is not only an issue of sexual violence in war, and see what we can do with what we've learned about the memory of the comfort women, now that the issues of recognition, compensation, and apology to the survivors is less the issue than the legacy of these women going forward. So that is the frame for our panel. It's a big one, but we have very big panelists to address it. Very important things to say. I won't introduce them in detail. You have that information on the website. But just to say that we will begin with Unshil Kim from Seoul in South Korea, and move on to Rada in Paris, and then to Chizuko Ueno in Tokyo. So let me start then, please, with Unshil.
Okay, I want to share the. Okay, my presentation, it would be very short, but politics of comfort women's testimony representations and the questions on memory writing in the post-memory era. Oh my God. Okay, yeah, this is a politics of comfort women's testimony representations and the questions of memory writing and post-memory era. I'm going to focus on 3 points. One is how have the experiences, testimonies, and memories of the comfort woman been represented in Korea, and how have such representations been received and understood. And second point is the problem with representing comfort women as either girl or grandmothers in Korea. And third one is comfort women being represented as girl or mother after the Me Too movement. I want to focus on 3 points. And on August 14, 1991, Kim Hak-sun comes forward publicly and testifies that she was a comfort woman. She demands a fact-finding mission and apology from the state and civil society. Other women who were comfort women follow suit and testify to their experience. The Korean state soon start to collect victims' reports and to embark on the verification of facts. In this process, the focus is mainly on extent to which women were forced into becoming comfort women and the accuracy of their memories. The comfort woman's experiences of being the comfort woman's experience of being forced, being pure victims, and being comfort women are collected in the forms of testimony. Before Kim Hak-sun, representation of comfort women are largely made through mass media, predominantly based on a male sexual fantasy and eroticization. Kim Hak-sun's coming out brings a significant change in that representation of comfort women begin to depend on the memories and testimonies of the women themselves. There has been a boost in fictional films and documentaries about comfort women in Korea since the 2015 Korea-Japan Agreement on Comfort Women. A large portion of the Korean civil society was enraged over the diplomatic agreement made without consent by the victims, giving rise to various representations, as in the films Spirit Homecoming, Snow Road, I Can Speak, Her Story, My Name is Kim Bong-nam, and Comfort. In May, yeah, this is a kind of you know, the happened after 2015, and in receiving and then to say the status of comfort women in Korea, I want to tell the one episode. In Korea, actually, comfort woman is not only a very delicate but very highly politicized issue. Actually, maybe many people, you know, have already known that comfort woman issue in Korea is a very politicized, very nationalized. At the same time, maybe very desexualized, so maybe, yeah. So in May of 2020, Lee Young-soo made a big scandal by criticizing the Korean Council for Justice and Remembrance for the issues of military sexual slavery by Japan, better known as Jang Dae-hyuk, and shook the whole Korean society. The problem brought up by Lee Young-soo in a press conference can be summed up in two kinds of questions. One is, why did you use us in your fundraising campaigns? Where did you spend the money raised? Why haven't you used the money for us, the comfort woman? That's maybe first question. And second question is, there must be changes in the Wednesday demonstration. Why must we carry our aging body to the rally every single week and recount our painful stories? You know, all those the Young-soo 할머니 and other 할머니 are going to rally, and they are always talking about their stories. The remarks made by Lee Young-soo made a headline in major newspaper, and many comments by readers were favor of her criticism. Her criticism was firstly a blow to Jang Dae-hyuk, and secondly to the political world, namely the Democratic Party of Korea, in which Yoon Mi-hang, who the head of Jang Dae-hyuk, was an elected member. It was challenged the existing practices and system of the Korean press, largely made up of what was considered right-wing press and left-wing press as well. Not only that, it caused reverberations across the feminist circle. The first response from the Jang Dae-hyuk was that Lee Young-soo, 92-year-old at the time, was getting so old that she was having problem with her memory and judgment. They even mentioned that Lee likely has dementia and cannot accurately judge what is happening around her. Here we should ask who is doing the judging and remembering actually then. After the incident, actors from all political and civil corners rushed to meet with Lee Young-soo. They claimed to want to make her demands met. What they were trying to do by appealing to her was to proclaim a righteous position of being morality and politically correct, and to represent themselves as having the power to solve the problems of the comfort woman. So Lee Young-soo met with both leftist and rightist figures. I think the most interesting thing about this Jang Dae-hyuk incident is the way in which Korean society receives what is said by Lee Young-soo, who is a symbol of both the Korean colonial era and women's suffering. Through the process of repeatedly testifying to the suffering experienced as comfort women, many former comfort women have transformed themselves into women's human rights activists and leaders of the comfort women's movement. In this process, Lee Young-soo came to criticize Jang Dae-hyuk and its head. Yoon Mi-hang, despite many years of working together, you know, they criticize each other. What transpired was that the long-held symbolism of Lee Young-soo as a victim, comfort woman, was destroyed. Instead of a human rights activist, she was turned into a grandmother with dementia. She was portrayed as a seeking money and causing harm to the Korean comfort women's movement. 2 points here. The comfort woman movement have been achieved by the victim so far, but we got actually what Young-soo said is we got no benefit. Another is that we are old, so all problems should be solved quickly. So actually, all Korean comfort woman movement and then all memories are provided by those comfort women, but they are getting older. At the same time, actually, all this through Young-soo, we got to know that actually the solution is far away, but at the same time, they are getting older. So what they are getting from this movement, the kind of idea she's saying. And second,
Yunchul,
yeah.
Yunchul, excuse me, Yunchul, we cannot see your PowerPoint.
Oh, no, you cannot?
No, we cannot. And you have to watch your time too, please.
All right. Okay. Then I'm going to go to the second question.
You don't have much time now, so.
I know. So second question is the problem with representing. Where is this?
Do you want to change your page on the PowerPoint?
I'm seeing the first page because to see the second question. The problem with the representing comfort women as either girls or grandmothers in Korea. So if we can see all those films I mentioned to you, there are girls or actually old women. So, you know, in through this the representation or through this the representation of the films or the relation between girls and old grandmother, I want to say that in some way why everybody is criticizing Korea because Korea is representing comfort woman through the girl, you know, this girl statue, and then always this innocent girl is representing all comfort women. Because of that, comfort women's stories cannot be made by who are not the kind of pure girls when they went to comfort station, or the woman who got married or who came from the prostitute. They cannot say what they are. So they are all criticizing about this kind of Korean, the image of comfort woman through girl. So in this session, I want to say that, so to make, you know, comfort woman status safe in terms of sexuality. So actually this is a very much conspiracy or maybe control of society. To make comfort woman politicized or to get a support from, I think, the state, or maybe when comfort woman came out and the state took over, and then they are taking their stories, and then they are actually made a file. So in that process, it was very much controlled and regulated. So through this kind of involvement with the state or you know, the getting support from government, actually there's a very big constraint and then problem, and that is kind of the space that feminists cannot easily enter into the comfort woman, the issues, because it is a highly actually controlled, who can be a proper comfort woman through state system. So that I think wanted to make a point as a problem or as a problematic.
Okay, last point, please.
Stand. Okay, the last point is yes, comfort woman being actually through the Me Too movement, through the several representation of comfort woman materials, try to make a connection between comfort to women who are grandmother, and then the girls next door, or maybe the different generation, or the film Comfort made by Bang Mun-chil. He purposely tried to put the woman who had experience of sexual violence, and he tried to make a connection between those women and then comfort woman. So in this kind of a making relationship between young women and comfort women, actually they try to make some transference space or maybe some kind of solidarity space. But we have to think about that, when we make this kind of a transference space, it is a good idea to have this kind of very identical, the identical position purposely propose, or when young people say, young women who are doing Me Too, they have a connection with the comfort woman through Me Too. But actually, this Me Too is a kind of a try to present a position of identification. So I think we have to think about, in making solidarity or some kind of connectedness between a different generation of women. Actually, the Me Too politics is good, or maybe we have to, propose a different politics, such as with you. Actually, I think we have to make a different, we have to make some, the gap over different space between them. If they can be identical, I think it is very difficult to make a different space. So, and then another.
Okay, Unshil, can we stop there now and pick up later, please? Okay.
Then maybe the last question, you said that we have to make 3 points in one question to all of us. The question to all of us, I wanted to raise, actually, comfort women's movement is a very, started out as a very transnational, the movement. But now the comfort women's movement in Korea or many other, the countries is going to be very national. So I wanted to raise the question to all of us, how can we get out of this kind of very national boundary of our comfortable movement, or how can we make some transnational space of, our movement? Okay, that would be a last question for all of us. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you very much. Would you please stop sharing your screen?
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So Rada Ivekovic, please.
Thank you. My talk, I have given it the name, The Gendered Politics of Memory. And I will talk a little bit about the Women's Court in Sarajevo in 2015. But also about general things. And I will start with one of my strong points. The first one is that gender violence is constitutive and founding of societies and of politics. Mass rapes in Yugoslavia in the 90s during the war compare with those of comfort women. Focusing on gender in transition societies is crucial, if not reduced to the binary of domestic and war violence, because these two are one. Gender violence, the basis of all other violence, is universal within patriarchal capitalism and coloniality, and is not eliminated by states. Femicides can be seen as state crimes against the backdrop of precariousness and violence and so on. Toxic masculinist hegemony implements such violence and unwritten social contracts, which are denounced by feminists. We study the way memory and history are constructed and used. Since contemporary globalization and its conservative revolution, the rollback of women's rights prevailed practically everywhere. Differently from Korea, however, there is no uniform official national memory of sexual violence at war in the case of Yugoslavia. This is an advantage and a disadvantage. Yugoslavia is a failed project, but one we can learn from. Women's memory of trauma is usurped by competing nationalisms of the 90s. Fragmented nationalist ethnicist projects victimized women, not one stately power within a general national cliche. To predominant masculine nationalist opinion, that violence is minor. Only feminist NGOs and research archived and reported to the UN drafted a clear memory of women's suffering in war. The state's national appropriation of women's memory referred in the Balkans to something else, to massacres of men by enemies mourned by victimized women, rather than to violence on women themselves. The Women's Court in 2015 delinked gender violence from its exclusive arrogation by state national interests, for whom rape is shocking only if inflicted by the enemy. Patriarchy, colonialism, coloniality, the state, nation, capitalism, even war, function as a continuum where gender violence is paradigmatic for other types of violence. In the system, in this case, neoliberal patriarchy, rape culture with femicides is inbred and gender violence not recognized, but it is accepted. Here belong also racism, extractivism, the state's apparatuses and society's structural violence, its remasculinization, militarization, primitivization, and the birth of populism with war. Patriarchy commands political structuring aspects of labor too. Patriarchal non-intersectional knowledge traditionally splits production as work from social reproduction as non-work. This is instrumental to dumping women and feminized bodies into unpaid labor. Separating these two, however, subordinates women. My second point is that since patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism are inextricable, getting rid of only one of them is impossible. They must be fought together. Yugoslav countries regressed through the partition wars of the 90s on all counts, especially in women's human rights, ignored by the nationalists, ethnicists, and successor states. In the last decades, a level of parity and fairly high standards in women's human rights, implying social solidarity, was brutally stopped everywhere. Yugoslav socialism from World War II to 1990 meant prosperity for women until the 90s war. Rolling back continued after war in successor states, causing women's resistance. During socialism, which is patriarchal too, by the way, women had the conclusive right to their bodies, to abortion, reproductive and other autonomy, divorce, work and equal pay, state support with kindergartens, education, health, and the state's backing when claiming their rights. But this was unbearable to the war-encouraged patriarchy. Feminist critique threatens all male hegemony. Historian Dubravka Stojanovic says, quote, "Keeping the patriarchal order was one of the strong drives for the collapse of Yugoslavia because within closed national constructs, this social order is far easier to maintain than in a complex multi-ethnic, multi-confessional community. It poses a constant challenge to a closed society and a patriarchal matrix," end of quote. Women's rights and women were the first targets of nationalists in war and before the war even. Since then, in the restoration of capitalism, society was violently militarized and repatriarchalized. Women's resistance to war, nationalism, and violence started through peace movements. The war 90s are remembered as traumatic, of course. Feminist NGOs such as Women in Black, a Belgrade NGO covering Yugoslavia, prepared a women's court to take place in Sarajevo in 2015 after the war. But within a militarized setting, successor states rejected the idea of a common truth and of any reconciliation commission. Only a women's court, however, the women's court for the former Yugoslavia and its successor states could be unbiased, nationally and politically unbiased. Ignored by the media, that court will be studied and recognized by historians. It embarked on a universal transformation, including beyond mere gender, with minorities, migrants, class, and race, and it embarked on rebuilding memory. Women's collected testimonies for the court condemn violence in the plundering redistribution of social wealth called transition at the end of socialism, in war and after, and in the general international circumstances as context, namely neoliberal globalization, but connected both of these affect women. In Yugoslavia, transition was conversion from war to peace and from socialism to capitalism, both simultaneously conditioned by nationality, gender, class, and coloniality. As in any partition, the process of partition can go on. In principle, it is open for changes. Trauma calls justice and truth-seeking collective memory within a context of competing nationalisms and memories. This aim exceeds completely the power of the national state, from whose side memory can be also misuse or restriction. Violence is then passed as endemic to the post-war period. Like memory, truth appears as potentially split. Pre-war, war, and post-war violence on women form a continuity hidden by official accounts reluctant to publicly condemn the persistence of gender violence in every sphere. The main conclusions from the Women's Court are women's demands for a just democratic society with gender justice, juridical and material equality, empathy, no impunity, equal procedures at trial, and involving also the opposite side. Mass rape and ethnic cleansing cooperated in Yugoslavia. The violence on women in spheres other than sexual, economic, political, cultural, ruled by nationalism, in any case, is ignored. Women are also targeted for their alleged authenticity or political leaning. Impunity continued even after the Dayton Agreement in '95 reached relative peace in a sevenfold partition. My third point is that sexual violence fundamentally contributes to building the national myth. The whole array meant to terrify was used. Femicides, rape, trafficking of women and girls, enslavement, with political and societal tolerance of violence to women. The 1989 conservative turn, the end of the Cold War, made it worse. Some feminists, however, have projects with women's methods and values, gender justice, care, concern, solidarity, nurturing, eco-feminism, and learning processes. Women have historically developed these in welcoming migrants too, which is crucial in the era of mass migration. The migrant is not a citizen, but carries a possible new citizenship, which ushers new political forms. Women are on that side too. But with no higher authority, tribunal, leader, God, to judge impartially, everyone remains with their own truth. Women and anti-nationalist feminists transcended nationalisms in Yugoslavia and provided impartial research while staying operational and toxic. Nations are still there and are still influencing the whole picture. But post-hegemonic societies, often populist, are politically disoriented. The Women's Court in Sarajevo, politically unbiased, played a critical role that no one else could assume. It fought for women's rights and against nationalism in one. The feminist struggle aims at general equality, neither a state nor a social institution. It translates seemingly non-political issues into political language. Feminists share a narrative rejected by all the new states. The feminist agenda doesn't coincide with the states. States have nationalist agendas. The feminist court has been the only universalist view in post-Yugoslavia. While narrating repressed suffering, judging from archived testimonies, the court prefigures a new future type of citizenship as a possibility. I will have questions to my co-panelists. One is whether feminists in Japan and Korea share a common feminist understanding of comfort women exploited by the Japanese Imperial Army. And do you think that this unbearable story is overshadowed by nationalist interests of each nation state? And then is the critique, your critique, the critique of these things, part of a feminist political projects? Because I think it doesn't work otherwise. And does the Korean state support women in general or only comfort women? How to avoid the issue being privatized? And Shil already said something about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Those are very good questions for us. Let me move on, please, to Chitsuko Ueno for our third presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Let's see. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a coordinator and author of the book towards Comparative History of Sexual Violence and War, published in 2018, together with historians, oral historians, and sociologists. Our project was triggered by publications of two translated books in Japanese. One is Regina Muhlhäuser's book, Sexual Violence and the Intimate Relationship of German Soldiers in Soviet Union, 1941 to 45. The other one is Mary Louise Roberts' book, What Soldiers Do, Sex and the American GIs in the World War II France. These two books are interestingly related to comfort women issue. Muhlhäuser joined the International Women's War Crime Tribunal in Tokyo in 2000 on the working as a volunteer interpreter. This experience made her decide to take up the issue of sexual violence by German soldiers in the East battlefront. Roberts' book was first introduced by a right-wing politician, Mayor of Osaka, in a protest letter against its sister city, San Francisco, which decided to put a replica of Comfort Women's statue. Prior to these books, the studies on sexual violence in war have been accumulated both in Japan and in Korea. By then, we felt that we were ready for comparative studies. The problematization of sexual violence in war has long been tabooed with the silence of the victims. The silence was broken with the testimonies by the survivors in 1991. Here's a brief chronology of the comfort women issue. Our book covers a wide range of women's experience of sexual violence, such as comfort women, Japanese pampan girls under US occupation, sexual violence of Japanese women by Russian soldiers at the time of withdrawal from Manchuria, illegal abortion of pregnant women coming back from Manchuria. Then three questions arise. One, why there has been absence of historical studies on sexual violence in war? Two, can we put all these diverse experiences of women in the comparative context? And then how and for what? Three, if not, is conflict women issue unique, incommensurable historical experience only compared with Holocaust? We continued discussion over these questions and reached a consensus. There is no prohibited question in history. In our book, we propose the following one paradigm shift and three analytical categories in the study of sexual violence. One paradigm shift is a change of the view of sexual violence in war from anecdotal, inevitable women's victimization by uncontrollable sexual desire of soldiers, which belong to the myth, to a systematic, organized exercise of sexual violence as a military weapon with implicit and explicit approval of or permission as organized practice with an intention of humiliation of enemies, masculinity, and destruction of a community. This paradigm shift was immediately applied by Nobel Foundation, which is reflected in the two winners of the Nobel Peace Prize. We also offer the theoretical challenge with the following three analytical categories. One, continuum of sexual violence from everyday life to war, borrowing from Liz Kelly. Two, exercise of women's agency from resistance to collaboration. Three, the concept of structural violence from Johann Galtung. One means that there's a gray zone between peacetime and wartime. What happens at the critical moment is an extension of the everyday experience. Two means that there's a gray zone between coercion and consent. Three means that there's a gray zone between physical violence and economic compulsion. First, in such a continuous context, how can we differentiate women's experiences from consent to Coercion, the survey of American couples report who initiates sex and who can say no in marriage. Their finding is that it's always husband who initiates sex and that it's always wives who can't say no. With asymmetrical gender relationship, wives rather endure a few minutes of patience than making husband frustrating. Muhoizer deals with a wide range of sexual contact from rape, prostitution, and marriage in a continuum. She cites a German soldier saying that Slav women opened their legs only for a crust of bread, and therefore there was no need of physical violence. Roberts deals with rape, prostitution, and love affair also in a continuum. We added to these lists such as undesired pregnancy, abortion, and children of enemies. The study about Japanese pam-pam girls under the US occupation proves that those women were not divided into categories, but had a variety of experience from rape, prostitution, love to war brides, going back and forth among them. Those are women's everyday experiences. As for the sex trade, the UN denies the concept of consent in trafficking in Palermo Protocol made in 2000. The protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime. It says trafficking in persons shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of the force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power or a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefit to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. So consent does not count in trafficking. Second is the role of the agency from resistance to collaboration. What makes the war studies unique is the clear divide between allies and enemies with a sharp asymmetrical power structure which changes in a short while. In a conflict zone, allies and enemies can be quickly reversed. People can take a position from resistance, bystander to collaborator. When the power structure is reversed, the former collaborators turn into enemies who are more severely punished. Since this memory of collaboration belongs to shame of the nation, victims are silenced until today. One example is French lover of Bosch. After the war, they were punished by shaving their head in public, the punishment deriving from medieval age, which is highly gendered, only applied to women collaborators. A Japanese women historian explored this issue by making interviews with those French women. She found it extremely difficult to find interviewees. One of her interviewees said that she had never been interviewed by French historians. The third is the legitimacy of narratives from silence to testimony, or who is entitled to claim as a victim. There's always a boundary control between legitimate victimization and illegitimate victimization. Legitimate victimization gives victims voices with narrative formulation, such as a model story with active participation of audience. Back behind breaking the silence, or in other words, thawing the once frozen memory, the change of the historical context often preceded it, such as the impact of international feminism and the rise of post-colonialism. The following concept of the gendered violence proposed by a group of anthropologists helps us understanding this continuum. They distinguish three types of gendered violence for redefinition of sexual violence: 1. Cultural and normative violence incorporated in the gender order. Norms and customs often not recognized as violence, such as forced chastity, veil, sati, foot binding, FGM. 2. Penalizing violence or punishment against the deviated women from gender norms, such as honor killings, stigmatization of victims of sexual harassment, exclusion of sexual minority. 3. Illegal or antisocial exercise of sexual violence, which the society defines criminal, such as rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, sexual abuse of children. The definition of the second type is particularly interesting. Violence, defined as punishment against deviances, defines deviances in retrospect. Penalty itself defines what should be penalized, often accompanying secondary assault. It follows blame on victims, assuming if she is victimized, she must deserve it. If she is innocent, she cannot be victimized. It forces victims to be responsible for proving unguilty. Sanctioning violence divides women between chaste women and unchaste women. Only a third type of illegal violence gives victims entitlement to claim for their victimization. This boundary can shift depending on the context. At the end, history is a set of selective remembering and forgetting. There must be still a lot of unspoken memories in history. What makes them to speak out is a feminist challenge to history. In order to do that, we must refuse the pyramid hierarchy of victims, because women's victimization is not a trivial issue to matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chizuko. Yes, thank you, everyone. Let me start the discussion with, I don't know what your question is, Chizuko. Do you want your question to be the feminist challenge to history? I just wanted to ask what your question
Yeah,
is.
that's the end, yes.
Okay, so what is the feminist challenge? And that relates to the others. So these are overlapping, very useful, I think, overlapping, intersecting ideas here, which I think prove that the comfort women issue is not only a regional issue and not only an issue of wartime. So let's take up the three issues at the beginning. First, let's talk about the question of nationalisms, whether it's the Korean, South Korean and Japanese nationalisms, which are overwhelming the comfort women issue at the moment, or whether it's the fractured, splintered nationalisms of the former Yugoslavia, the successor states. So can this issue travel? Can it be transnational? How to escape the prison house of national borders? That's number one. And some of the suggestions you talked about, solidarity and linkages, may be part of the answer. Number two, I think you mentioned the fact, each of you, that you cannot deal with sexual violence against women in war as a separate issue. It is linked deeply, structurally, using Chizuko's word, it's structurally embedded in culture, society, politics, and indeed economics. As Radha says, you can't just deal with women's sexual violence without dealing with the underlying patriarchal, capitalist, and colonialist structures in which the views of women are embedded. This also links to the question of different kind of continuum mentioned by Unsul about would you connect the Me Too issue to the comfort women? This relates to the consent versus coercion issue. So I think the second issue is, how do you deal with this? Are you going to deal with it by dealing with everything at once? How do you approach this? A third issue, I think, is the role or the place of the victims. Who speaks for whom? Who doesn't speak at all, and why? That's certainly the story that Unshil tells us about this 92-year-old former comfort woman, Lee Song-ju, who speaks out in 2020 and then finds herself slandered as an old woman losing her memory. She was speaking out for the actual victims. So this question of the place of the victims in this, and that's true of the comfort women, or it's true of women who are victims of rape or victims of domestic violence or sexual harassment or anything else. Where is the women? Where are the victims in here? And let me just add a fourth point, which relates to this. I think you're all asking, you're all posing, if you like, the feminist challenge, the feminist challenge to history. What do feminists or people engaged in the memory battle against sexual violence against women, what is their methods? What are their means? What are their approaches? So I see those four things as interlocking, and I'd like to start with the nationalism question, and the floor is open to any of you. Is there a way to get out of the national prison house of politics and thinking?
Who
Who
speaks?
wants to start?
Yeah, well, okay. Carol, actually, I thought, Radha and I have already answered to the first question in our presentation. So by the term of continuum.
In what way? How does that get past the nationalism?
Yeah, so, and also Radha also very much stressed that, this, anti-nationalist feminist activism against the nationalization of sexual violence in the Yugoslavian case. And so this is actually what, the UNSIL is, proposing the question.
Radha said that the Women's Court in Sarajevo in 2015, which was a model for impartial research and transnational solidarity, was ignored by much of the public. Yeah.
It was ignored because for several reasons. One is masculinism, general masculinism. So whatever women say is subordinate to whatever men have to say. But also in Yugoslavia, starting with the war in the 90s and up to this day in Yugoslav countries, we have a completely fragmented picture of so many small nationalism or ethnicisms that work each for themselves only and against the others. And there is also no, in my understanding, no qualitative difference between ethnicism and nationalism. It all comes to the same. But what was your question then? I'm sorry.
My question is, I hear you saying, all of you, that there's a problem with the nationalist approach to the sexual violence against women in the comfort women or in the former Yugoslavian case. And I hear you saying that shouldn't be the case, but I don't hear you saying how to get past that.
Yeah, if I am to continue, I would say that in both in Yugoslavia and generally, actually the problem is the nation, the form nation, with which nationalism comes. Absolutely. As soon as you have a nation, you have nationalism, right? But the nation is so strongly linked to everything that has to do with women, starting from its language in European languages. I don't know about Far Eastern languages. All the vocabulary comes from birth, giving birth, being born. The word nation itself is one such word. So obviously women are fundamental here, and their subordination is crucial to the nation. It is part of the system. So of course it is very difficult and not real, but in peace nations can collaborate and cooperate and have good relations, right? But potentially every nation is split, and then you have this possible civil war, one that we had in Yugoslavia, and you don't get through with it with nation or nationalism. You must get through it, in my opinion, in fighting nationalism, because nationalism fundamentally bears with it anti-misogyny in at all levels, and violence to women. So I see our the horizon of our struggle as very wide, and the Women's International Court in Sarajevo tried to do that. So we have a lot of documents also of women's testimony, but most important, we have worked with those women, and those women have worked together to get to another understanding of society and politics, and to be able to collaborate with other women.
Well, you see, now that's a concrete suggestion that the women can work together across the national borders, and that seems to me to be something
better than men. They can better than men.
Well, yeah, yeah, that would
I'm,
be a kind of the suggestion, but the issue is it is not easy, right? And then being being a comfort woman in Korea, actually, comfort woman is a registered the position in some way. There were a lot of the as comfort women, but when they came to Korea and then they came out, and then they became a kind of recognized comfort woman, then it is very much nationalized. They are related with the supporting system, and and they have to write down every the how they enforce and everything. So actually there are a lot of victims in Korea, but always the victims, national try to control them, and they try to find who are correct victim, who are real victim, authentic victim. So actually, by categorizing these things and by hierarchizing these people, these victims, and then nation try to perform power, and then they are integrating people into such a kind of supporting system. So that's the reason the state is kind of working, to control and to categorize and then to divide the people and these things. But actually, and then the nation has a lot of resources, actually, a lot of feminists. They really have to fight against, the nation state. But actually, a lot of people are really working with the nation state, actually.
Yeah.
And then the nation is competing each other, and then they are part of that, competing system. So, I think really we need some kind of, you know, the beyond nation or some transnational, you know, solidarity or some national practice of feminism, but very difficult. So
well,
we have to make an agenda.
Well, I think you're right. It's very difficult. I think we might agree for the moment that we're not going to be able to abolish the nation state right now. So
No.
the question is, what can we do? And I want to go back to Chizuko here because this is her challenge. Now, this is the question of what the feminism or what the movement for women's rights can do to challenge the silence and to challenge the national control. I mean, we have to assume that the nations are going to keep doing what nations do, but what can feminists do to counter their control? Chizuko, can you help us with that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. But it's actually too big a question to answer by myself for everyone. But first of all, that's why I posed the idea of legitimacy or victimization. Who controls this legitimization? It's the state or the patriarchal society which defines the legitimacy. So at this moment, we have a very little power to fight against it. But you know, that as Rada and Unsu said, you know, the women's activism helps a great deal, but at the same time, theory helps. I mean, so that, you know, in our process of, you know, the researches on the sexual violence, including comfort women issue, we have accumulated and also developed not only the fact or the testimonies, but also the theoretical approaches from one another. And, you know, for instance, you know, the theory of oral history have been very much, developed. So we see the testimonies of the victims not in the same way as we did. So this kind of theory development had helped us a great deal to make us, go into the comparative perspective. You know, otherwise we just couldn't, you know, put all these different experiences in the same perspective. But you know, there might be some people who are very much uncomfortable about it. And as just Unsu said, you know, that you seem to be suspicious about this, you know, continuity or the solidarity of the identification of the girls and the harmony and all the grandma in the Me Too movement. So in this sense, you are more, complex and difficult situation in this context. I'd like to hear your opinion about it.
Bunshil, do you want to make the point about the problem with the link between the comfort women issue and the Me Too movement? You said there were problems.
Actually, young people can understand sufferings of comfort women, but young people, if they say Me Too, I think, it's not really the young people's experience of sexual violence cannot identical with, or maybe, it's not really the understanding the moment of Me Too, I think. There is some kind of implicated or kind of some kind of is understanding, but that should not be identical. They can, they can be there line by side by side or something, but I missed what I presentation is actually translation of testimony of comfort women into Japanese or into English. How can it translate it? People try to translate testimony in a very good way, but how? there's a lot of discontinuity and hiding and silence and not complete sentence and everything. How can we translate this comfort woman testimony into English? I'm not saying it's impossible, but we have to, I think we have to theorize, or we have to make some, the thinking about, how can we translate this kind of very different, the studies produced in a very different time and space. We are going to translate this produced in a very different time and space into very different time and space, So I think the young people and older women need to look at it in this kind of way. So
there's two things there. One, I think that Chizuko's point about the uses of theory help, because, for example, the point that she makes about the relation between consent and coercion is something that actually helps in thinking about the comfort women and Me Too. If you bring it up to the level, that's a slightly more theoretical, abstract level, then I think you can talk about them together. The second point is that you ask about translation. The translation that you're talking about being difficult is actually the nature of memory itself, in the sense that you are translating from a former time and space into a memory of a memory space here and now. So I think that's not a language question. I think that also is a theoretical question.
But actually, there is a kind of the project of translation, and then people try to make a really, really good translate to the version, and then what they are doing is punctuation and then space and and then footnote and everything, but my idea is that we have to think about more fundamental thing of translating, of this memory produced in a certain time and space, even actually not into English, but even in different generation. A lot of people are dying, and we have some stories about them made by them, and then we have to make we have to tell this memory to another generation. I think it's maybe very similar context, I think, yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's the nature of memory. Any of you have some comments? I think that I hear what you're saying about nationalism, that the way forward is to try to make links across among the Women's International Court in Sarajevo. It was also the model of the mock tribunal held in Tokyo in 2000 about the comfort women. It was solidarity across borders. So that's one thing I hear you saying. Another thing I hear you saying is that theorizing, and I would also add legal. I mean, there's a lot of legal changes that have taken place in this issue. And so we can, the law actually helps, even though it's an imperfect instrument. So theory and the changes in the law are helpful in breaking out of the national framework. The other thing I hear you saying is that the comfort women issue is still being treated as a very special issue. So let's go to Chizuko's last point, and maybe it's also Rada's question. Rada says, does the South Korean state support comfort women or all women? And Chizuko says that what kind of comparisons, what kinds of what kinds of commensurability, okay? Not like is it incommensurable, you said? So is the comfort women so special? So let's have the final words on that, and we'll open up, or on anything else you want to say, we'll open up the session to questions from the audience. But do you have anything else to say about this?
I have a question. Is it okay? I have a question also.
Chizuko, go ahead.
Yes, yeah. If you put the stress on uniqueness, it sounds like you discredited the comparative studies itself, and talking about the uniqueness of the experience, there are a variety of experience which cannot be, commensurated in this sense. But after all, what kind of memories is to be legitimized or approved by the society and by the nation and also by the activists themselves. In this sense, in the time of the post-memory era, it's inevitable that who to judge, who approves those legacy. And in this sense, the feminist activism is not innocent.
That's a very good point. I don't know whether you want to take this up, but I think that the point that feminist activism is not innocent is very well represented or displayed in this comfort women issue in the movements in different countries. So we can take it up or not. But do you want to answer that question?
Comfort women, I think, the sexual violence issues or this kind of wartime, the violence is everywhere. That's true. But I think there's something, in Korea, make a comfort woman issue special, actually. Maybe this is a very much political thing. That means actually, the government is trying to take comfort women as a kind of, not weapon, but as a kind of tool to deal with Japan in diplomatic way. And actually, this is not, I think a comfort woman issue is a very important to politicians, or it's very important to the Korean government, actually. So not only issue as a feminist issue or as an issue of victim of wartime. I think there's a lot of political or the international politics related with the comfort woman issue. Yeah.
Okay, well, we understand what the South Korean state is doing, but our question is, how do we get beyond that? And how do we counteract that, if you like? Anybody else want to say something else before we ask them?
May I just say that I think that it is a long-term thing. In any case, when you say what can we as activists do about it, of course, activism is like any other ism, but also like activism for other causes has many tracks, and there is no definitive truth in any of it. But what I feel is important is, for one, not freezing memory as an official memory, because that won't help women. And also getting beyond such memory as frozen and official, in working with people and cooperating. This is the most important. This is why I mentioned, this was a passing remark, but in the Women's Court in Sarajevo, we had projects for the future and projects about a new type of citizenship. What could it bring to us? A citizenship where all are included with equal rights and equal opportunities, and not let comfort women or other women in that situation become hostage by a state. Right, the concept of comfort women, also because there is a title, the title of comfort women, which does not always apply, doesn't appear in other cases in the former Yugoslavia. We don't have one such common term that makes it clear, because every nationalist party will consider their women only to have been victims from the others, but they are not at all ready to do anything for women in general. They are not interested because they don't want to get out of patriarchy as it is, and now reinforced through the war, reinforced and fascistized or Nazificated through the war, through the last war. So we must get out of this, across the memory question to the question of politics, but open politics, open to all and developing forms of citizenship or of...
So it's a broader question than feminism, I understand that. So let me, thank you for that. I think this question of making sure that we see the sexual violence against women or gendered violence in the context that produces it, whether it's the national context or the patriarchal context or the colonial context. That's that structural context that Chizuko mentioned. So you don't see it only in and of itself, and you certainly don't see comfort women as unique, but certainly not. I mean, then I would say, what is the use of comfort women memory once they're gone, if that cannot be the case? I'd like to open up the floor to questions. I think it might be easier for you to put them in the chat. If you do raise your yellow, and the host will have to unmute you, I think. So as you wish. There's one question in the chat at the moment. I'll start with that. It's a question to Unshil about South Korea. There is apparently, it's anonymous, by the way. The person
the film. Okay, I open. Yeah.
Okay, so the anonymous question is: there is a ministry in South Korea, in the South Korean government, a ministry for gender equality, and there's a debate about it. And the question is, if there were a change in the Ministry of Gender Equality, what effect would that have on the comfort women issue?
Actually, government says that even though the Lee Yong-soo, the harmony actually said to ruling group, I don't know, president or not, she said we really need the Ministry of Gender Equality, and then the ruling party, the government person said to Lee Yong-soo, don't worry, even though there is no Ministry of Gender Equality, we are supporting comfort women, as it was, as it is, or more than that, So they are saying that, no, don't worry, we are trying to keep the function of Ministry of Gender Equality, but we wanted to abolish the name and then, hold the system.
What is the name? What is, Unshil, what is the name they propose?
They did not make any name yet, but actually they are saying that we are going to consolidate or strengthen the function of Ministry of Gender Equality, but we don't want this ministry. What kind of idea is that?
Well, that sounds like the South Korean government. I would like to point out to our audience that the South Korean government was not interested in the comfort women issue at all for the first 14 years or so. So that this state takeover of comfort women memory is actually a recent political and geopolitical development in South Korea. It didn't start that way. So
no, actually, it was Lee Myung-bak government. Actually, they went to what's that, the court actually, and then the government got lost, and they have to support and take care of this comfort woman issue. So finally they got it.
Well, and they started to use it. Okay, now there's a question from John Solomon. I don't know if I can unmute you. I'm not sure I have the capacity. Will somebody, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, John,
Yeah.
good.
Hi, Carol. Hello, everybody. I have a question. What I'd like to do is, I think this panel is really, really very important and very timely, and is really actually quite radical. And I'd like to incorporate that into, or to pursue that further, and then see if the panelists feel that that perspective would promote the kinds of causes that they're talking about, or whether that would distract from it. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm really thinking about here in just very compressed and short form is that the experience of unpaid labor, domestic care, and slavery is absolutely, as Sylvia Wynter sort of said, is the starting point of where to begin to rebuild a new kind of Marxist theory that isn't just focused on mode of production, but is looking at reproduction as the key to understanding how we got here and hopefully how we can get out. I'm just curious whether or not the panelists think that that kind of contextualization or would aid what they're trying to do or would distract away from it. That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. I think, Radha, you want to say something? Yes, please.
Thank you, John, and hello. The issue of reproductive work, which is considered non-work in traditional Marxism, and production, which is considered work and therefore salaried and paid, I think that is still actual. It still has its importance, and it's a very important dimension of what we are talking about. But I'm sure it's not the only one. This is, for example, what Silvia Federici has been doing in her book Caliban and the Witch, and what Veronica Gago has been doing on women's strike, the women's strike in Latin America, in Argentina, and all over. And this is extremely important. But I am afraid that this issue has to be taken from all sides and not from one side, not even from the most fundamental bottom. Yeah, this is why it is so tricky.
Yeah. Actually, I think these days, for feminists, actually the social reproduction or social reproductive labor issue is a really big issue, including care work. And I think the sexuality issue is very much related with the social reproductive, the work over social reproduction issues. So, yeah, so it's not really separated from this issue.
May I add one thing? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I'm one of the few Marxist feminists in Japan. Talking about the unpaid labor or the domestic labor, there's some recent argument that that the domestic labor originally it was done by slaves in the ancient Rome and Greece. So in this context, that the domestic workers still today are very much underestimated and as essential workers and so forth, and they are very low paid. So unless the society or men and themselves value that reproductive labor, we just cannot change the society.
But it's a good, I think, I like the idea of thinking about it. It's just another context. It's a foundational context. You don't have to maybe start with that, but thinking about it makes really good sense, I think. I have another question here. I'm going to come to Vicky in a minute, but there's a question in the chat that says, it actually asks Radha, but it's equally relevant to the comfort women. And that is, how would you assess the gaps and inconsistencies in the testimonies of the victims of sexual violence, which are often used by right-wing or governments or nationalists to question their validity, right? In other words, this is what the Japanese government does. This is how do you deal with the differences in the oral testimony that's so important? So that's the question for Radha, and I think actually for your others too.
For others too, but I will say just shortly, yes, Kuspu, thank you. But you see, I would take it as what you called it, as inconsistencies. And I'm afraid it is impossible to imagine an acceptable narrative that is completely consistent and has no inconsistencies. There are gaps, there are inconsistencies. This means that we have to work at every step, and this is politics, right? Luckily, we have politics. If we didn't have gaps and inconsistencies, we would have totalitarianism. We don't want that either. So yes, it's difficult to have gaps and inconsistencies. We must try to work through them, but let's not imagine that we can do without them. This is how I see it.
Yes, and I would add that all documents, all testimony, all human records have inconsistencies. That's the nature. So we have to deal with it the same way, you know, that we would deal with other sources. I'd like to ask Vicky Singh to ask her question. If you could unmute Vicky, please.
Maybe she put a question in the chat. No,
there she is. There she is. Okay, there you go, Vicky.
My name is Vicky. I'm from Scripps College, and
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, you're not hearing me? Okay, sorry. Can you hear me right now?
Louder.
There you go.
Sorry. I have to be really close then. Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Vicky, and I study the story of Chinese comfort women through
louder.
Okay. Can I come back later with my AirPods?
Yes, maybe you should, because we can't hear you. Come back later. Okay. I want to go now to Steffi Richter, who is in the chat, who offers us a positive example of how to transcend the national borders with an article that she's put in the chat about the Berlin Comfort Women statue and how nationalism did not succeed. Are you there, Steffi? Can you say something about that? No, you're not there. All right. Anyway, if the article is in the chat if you want to read about it. And then there's one more here from Ahyun Angela Lee, who is a PhD student in Germany researching comfort women museums. And she wants to ask you what you think about the subject of the comfort women memory culture. Are the comfort women victims the only subject of the comfort women? Or would you extend that to include the activists, researchers, students, and citizens and how they remember the comfort women? So this is a question of the comfort women themselves, the former comfort women, and the activists who are not innocent, the activists who support them. Would you include them in this whole realm of comfort women memory? That's the question.
I think so. Actually, when I and some of my colleagues are studying about the testimony collected in maybe 90s or something, sometimes we are thinking about the interviewer, of those kind of testimonies. Actually, they suffered a lot in 90s actually, but if we sometimes we really wanted to make an interview with this interviewer, how they the how did they listen to the stories from Comfort Woman? Actually, at the time, time is very different from now. So I think, Comfort Woman's story itself is not authentic at all, right? It is very much sometimes a cooperative project between interviewer and interviewee, and these things, yeah. And then researchers, yes.
But do you include, the question I think is, if you think of the Comfort Women as a memory question, do you include the advocates, the activists, the opponents? And if you do that, the questioner says, doesn't that extend it beyond national borders? That's the question.
Yeah, actually, we don't know how many, I don't know how many people we have to include, but actually, I think sometimes when I have an interview with someone, actually, the story that I collected is really not their present story. This is kind of the answer from my question. And then who actually wrote the story? I think the interviewer or the researcher's story should be included.
Okay, so and may I remind everyone that there are Comfort Women all across Asia, and that the issues in South Korea are not the same as the issues in the Philippines, are not the same as the issues in Indonesia, are not the same as the issues in Malaysia, are not, etc. And that's really important because you will see different combinations of issues on this question of the activists and the former Comfort Women. I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to go back to.
May I add one thing?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, okay. Talking about inconsistency, I would say history itself quite inconsistent. So in the process of developing of the oral history theory, actually, there's a shift of the use of a technical term from testimony to narratives and life history to life stories. So in this sense, it's already quite a shared knowledge that the narratives is a joint product by two stakeholders, two players of the interviewers and interviewees, which just Unsil said.
Exactly.
So in this sense, the history is the legacy of the narratives, or memorizing and forgetting. So in this sense, as I said, the feminist activism is not innocent, but at the same time, historians are not innocent at all.
Exactly. Yes, thank you for emphasizing that. I'm going to go back to Vicky and then to Ji-hyun. Vicky, now we want to try again.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you talk,
okay,
we'll hear you.
If you speak loudly,
okay, great,
please.
thank you. Yes, okay, thank you so much. So first, thank you all for sharing. I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I study the story of Chinese Comfort Women through oral history perspective. And my question is, I personally understand the memory of Comfort Women as one that transcends not only the geographical national border, but also the generational border. And one of the reasons that I believe in this is because in oral history, I believe the experience of Comfort Woman is itself a really diaspora experience, and that, for example, many Comfort Women with different nationalities, they refer to each other as sisters. And then this solidarity is founded upon sexual violence. And then in current days, I believe the memory of Comfort Woman is also transcended through this bodily and transgenerational trauma. I believe when Comfort Women go home, they tell their stories to their daughters, to their granddaughters, and then their stories influence their mothers and the entire maternal line in different ways. So I just really learned to see this memory and appreciate this memory as one that's really transgenerational. So my question is, what's your take on transgenerational trauma as one that help us preserve history and understand memory of Comfort Women?
Okay, let me just thank you, Vicky. Let me just repeat that because it was hard to hear. The former Comfort Women, the survivors, very often when they met one another, had a feeling of solidarity, felt themselves as sisters. And Vicky is saying that this kind of solidarity has a transgenerational effect, and the notion that in a generation such as Vicky's, that there's the idea of transgenerational trauma, that this can be, in terms of the memory, this can be continued. And she wants to know what you think of this idea of transgenerational trauma that creates a kind of solidarity among people who in different generations based on what they know about the comfort women.
Yeah, well, that's the reason sometimes the way in which comfort woman is a little bit controlled, or maybe, you know, sometimes, you know, some nationalist project is they are, you know, publicizing comfort women's stories or some victim stories, but sometimes state or some organization or some group, they don't let young generation go far. Actually, they try to you know, when we are talking about melancholy or these things, actually people are listening to memories, but there's no way to get out of it. So people are trying to put the story into their body, and then, you know, the depression or, you know, all this pain, you know, they are holding or they are reproducing. I think that kind of way of disseminating, you know, the memories and stories and narratives, you know, produced. And then even in Korea, actually, sometimes, you know, a lot of, not a lot of, many, actually, nationalism-oriented film, they are producing the affects or emotion in that way. They try to, you know, give emotion to Korean people to be Korean. You know, we are oppressed. We are the victim. So we are learning the victim's feeling through the book or through the, you know, the media or through the films, actually. So that's the reason sometimes, you know, very much nationalized, you know, the demonstration of some victimhood or, you know, the suffering we are criticizing. Yes, I think, you know, how this kind of media is reproducing or conveying, you know, sufferings and, you know, pains to people. I think, yeah, we can say in a way, yes.
Thank you. And Ji-hyun, you have a question?
Carol,
Yes.
may I add one thing to answer?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. Okay, talking about the transgenerational solidarity, actually, you know, Vicky, you must understand that, you know, those people wouldn't tell their traumatic past to their direct children. Rather, they started talking about their past to the generation of the grandchildren. In this sense, there's a quite interesting rise of making art works or documentaries and films and others by the people belonging to the grandchildren's generation in Japan. I mean, they make interviews with almost the last survivors who lived long at their age of 80s and the 90s. So living long helps us a great deal.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. Ji-hyun, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to raise a question as a way of responding to Ah-hyun Lee's questions. I mean, I think that some comfort women statues built in Germany, sometimes it's very problematic. It sounds to me. I mean, the first comfort women statue that was built in Germany, do you know where it was?
Yeah, I know where it was.
It was in the Himalaya Nepal Park in Vizhens. a small town with just 2,000 inhabitants. Totally out of context, they sent it. And I think that way of building this monument to comfort women in Bijant in Himalaya Nepal Park actually was initiated by the local politics in Korea, in the local elections in Korea, just before local elections in Korea. So I mean and then after that, in the meter we now see the comfort women statue, and now in Leipzig. Of course, there are some different agents are involved in making these comfort women statues in Berlin, in Wiesn, and Leipzig. But I think that this transnational memory activism is not free from any nationalist way of appropriating the comfort women memory. So in a sense, the guys who are standing behind this project of building comfort women statue in Germany is a way of exporting national memories of Korea to Germany. So the world would recognize the suffering of Korean nation. That sort of feeling stand behind these sort of activities sometimes. So we need to be a little bit prudent about the effect and impact and intention of those transnational memory activists who are trying to build everywhere the comfort women statues and a totally out of historical context. This one thing. The other thing, I think that when the Carol raised the question of how to overcome the nationalist, regulation or nationalist, a certain control over the question of a sexual violence, something like that. Just I don't have any solution, but it's Mutakaze, a Japanese, a feminist sociologist. She gave a very interesting speech at my institute about 3 years ago. And very explicitly, she raised the connectivity between the denialist discourses of comfort women in Japan and man-chauvinist denialist discourse of Me Too movement. Sometimes, the victims of sexual violence in the Me Too movement, they don't have any written document to prove that they were, actually victimized by the sexual attack or sexual violence by the man. And then this, as you said, that the oral testimony is not consistent, inconsistent, and very, very often those, how can I say, they man-chauvinist, denialist discourses used to make use of this, how can I say, certain holes or lack of written documents to deny the victims of Me Too movement and some different victims of sexual violences in different countries. So I think that can be also revealing how these man-chauvinist denialist discourses get together in denying the victims of sexual violence would be also one of the very interesting points to start with, to think of how to overcome nationalist way of appropriating our memories. That's just my.
Thank you. Do you have any responses to that? Anybody?
No, just a quick comment. This continuity of denial itself proves the continuity of the Me Too and the sexual violence of Korean women.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Are there any other questions? All right, well, let me say that there's two things that we've heard today, I think, very clearly. One, there's no question that the comfort women issue, at least from the point of view of South Korea, is all about South Korea, all right? I mean, and Japan. That's what you keep saying. That doesn't mean that the comfort woman movement, the memory, which has absolutely left the borders of East Asian countries because it was very important in the inclusion of rape as a crime against humanity in the statute for the International Criminal Court in 1998. The comfort women were mentioned in every argument. So regardless of what the Korean government is thinking, the comfort women have traveled, all right? So the question then for us is, what do we do now with those travels? And I hear you saying that we need to include, we don't just deal with the comfort women or even only with sexual violence against women, certainly not only in war. We have to deal with it in a continuum from everyday life through all kinds of actions like trafficking. Second, that we have to deal with it in a larger context of the nation, the patriarchy, the rest, all of these structural or the reproductive assumptions that John mentioned. And third, I hear that we do have mechanisms or possibilities for broadening and deepening and extending this question, this memory. And I think Chiziko says, yes, we should use theory. We should think about the theoretical parts. And Radha says, we need to use history, which is to think about the structural parts. And Unshil says we have to think about the connections between Me Too and comfort women or not. And I would argue that we do include, in answer to the question, you do include the advocates, the activists, the deniers. They're all part of this. If you study memory, you don't only study the people who either suffered the grievance or inflicted it. It's not just perpetrators or victims. And I think that this enlargement of the landscape of memory thinking and memory doing is one thing that we can think about for the entire topic of our conference. But certainly for the question of sexual violence, we know what the task is and we know how hard it is, but I think we also have tools to overcome even and Ji-Hun is right, every single one of these comfort women movements in the different countries is very nationally or ethnically circumscribed. That doesn't mean that we need to be that way. So I would like to end the panel by thanking everyone. I think it was very thought-provoking. I also thought it was very performative, that we performed all the problems. So anybody listening will have no doubt what the problems are in dealing with gendered sexual violence, the memory of, and the present practice of, and very little and a lot of work to do to prevent the future practice of sexual violence. And so I thank you for everything that you said to us. I thank the audience for their questions. And I say to you that there is plenty to do. And there are plenty of ways to do it. So I encourage all of us to keep on keeping on. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.